The morning sun spilled golden over the estate, kissing every ivy-wrapped archway and marble path. It should have been a beautiful day. And for them, it was. For me, it was just another reminder that I didn't belong. Not in their world, not at this wedding, and certainly not at their table. I stood at the edge of the perfectly trimmed hedge maze that my father spent a decade shaping, watching guests in designer suits and heels file into the grand hall. I could see it all from the garden, but I wasn't on the guest list. I never was. My father worked for the Beaumont family his whole life. He wasn't just their gardener, he was their silent fixer, their plant whisperer, their groundskeeper, their after-hours handyman. I was just the boy who followed him around with a watering can when I was 7 and stayed in the shadows while they laughed in the sun. The bride today was Madeline Beaumont, blonde, beautiful, rich. She was the type who used to call me Moss Boy in school because I smelled like fertilizer one day after helping my dad. She also happened to be my cousin. They didn't want me here, but I came anyway. I arrived in a black shirt and slacks, neatly pressed, though not expensive. My shoes were polished, my hair clean. I wasn't trying to fit in. I just wanted to see the ceremony. I stood near the rear entrance, hoping to quietly observe from the shadows, but someone noticed me before I could blend in. "Oh my God, is that Theo?" I heard someone whisper with mock surprise. I turned. It was Emily, one of Madeline's bridesmaids. Her voice was thick with syrupy cruelty. "He's not here to work, is he?" She laughed to the others. "Did someone order weeds with the hors d'oeuvres?" The others laughed, sharp and dismissive. A few heads turned, then more. And just like that, all eyes were on me. I tried to nod politely, to be invisible again. But invisibility doesn't work when they decide you're the joke. Madeline spotted me next. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, narrowed with disgust. "What is he doing here?" she asked sharply, turning to her wedding planner. "Is the staff coming in through the front now?" "I'm not staff," I said calmly, though my throat tightened. "I'm family." The silence was brutal. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "You? Family? Don't flatter yourself, Theo. You're the gardener's son. That doesn't make you a Beaumont. It makes you an employee's kid. You shouldn't even be here." I stood there humiliated, throat dry, stomach twisted in knots. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to vanish. But I did none of that. I nodded, swallowed my shame, and started to turn away, just like I always had, just like they always expected. And then her fiancé stepped out, holding 2 glasses of champagne, pausing when he saw the scene. "Everything all right?" he asked Madeline. She glanced at me with smug cruelty. Theo thought he was invited. "Who?" He blinked. "The guy who used to mow the back lawn?" My blood boiled. My father gave this family everything. Late nights fixing broken fountains, early mornings replacing storm-damaged trees. Even during hurricanes, he showed up. And this was the thanks? I turned, biting my tongue so hard I tasted blood. But as I walked back through the garden, the very one my father built from dirt and stone, an idea began to form. A quiet idea. A dangerous idea. One that tasted like cold steel and quiet revenge. They called me the gardener's son. Fine. But by the end of today, they were going to call me something else entirely. I didn't go home. Instead, I walked to the back of the estate, behind the servants' quarters, where the old glass greenhouse sat abandoned and locked. It was where my father taught me about soil pH, light balance, and how even the most fragile orchids could survive with the right care. It had always been our little kingdom. Now it was crumbling, like the respect they pretended to show him for decades. I sat on a rusted bench and stared at the towering mansion through the vines, my fists clenched, my jaw aching. Years of quiet humiliation bubbled in my chest like acid. I remembered every time they walked past my father without a single thank you. Every Christmas we got a box of supermarket chocolates, while the Beaumont dogs received hand-wrapped designer treats. Every time I asked if I could come to a family event and was told, "It's just for immediate family, sweetheart." But here's what they didn't know. 2 years ago, the estate had quietly gone up for sale behind the scenes. The Beaumonts were losing money, bad investments, quiet lawsuits, maybe even greed. They didn't want to ruin their reputation, so they sold the property to a private firm under confidentiality. I worked part-time at the city records office back then. I saw the deed change hands. I knew the truth. The Beaumont estate no longer belonged to the Beaumonts. It belonged to me. I had saved, invested, and worked quietly. And when the shell company I formed bought the estate, not a single person thought to look deeper. Not even Madeline. Not even my uncle, who once told me, "Don't expect anything from this family, Theo. You're not one of us." They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. I changed into a fresh blazer I had hidden in my car, a sharp navy one that made me look less like the gardener's kid and more like someone with power. Then I walked calmly to the main building, bypassing the kitchen, bypassing the front steps, and entering through the side door the owners used. People turned, but this time the laughter faded. Maybe it was the way I held myself. Maybe it was the glint of something unspoken in my eyes. I walked straight to the venue manager, Mrs. Calder, a kind, silver-haired woman who had handled all their events for years. "Is the deed ready?" I asked her under my breath. She smiled knowingly. "All signed and sealed, Mr. Harwood. You sure you want to do this today?" I nodded once. Today's perfect. The music played. Guests were being ushered into the ballroom. Madeline floated down the hallway in her lace gown, trailed by bridesmaids like she was the star of a royal fairy tale. She didn't even see me as she passed, still too blinded by her own glitter to notice the tide turning. I stepped into the ballroom. At the front of the room, a microphone stood unused. I walked toward it. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to slice through the piano. "I'd like to make an announcement before the ceremony begins." Gasps, whispers, confused glances. Madeline's mother hissed, "Get him out of here!" But Mrs. Calder raised a hand. "Let him speak!" I turned to face the crowd, the very people who'd laughed at me, dismissed me, called me a weed in their perfect garden. I know many of you don't know me. Some of you pretend not to. I've been called the gardener's kid my whole life. A joke, a background character, a shadow. I paused, breathing through the storm in my chest. But what none of you know is, I'm also your new landlord. Stunned silence. Gasps spread like wildfire. Madeline's jaw dropped. Her groom blinked like I'd spoken another language. I pulled out the deed, official, signed, sealed, and handed it to Mrs. Calder, who held it up for everyone to see. The words at the top were unmistakable. Owner, Theodore Harwood. Effective immediately, I continued. This estate is under new ownership, and I'd like to inform the bride and groom that their event was never officially approved. Madeline shrieked, lunging toward me. "You can't do this. This is my wedding." "No," I said calmly. "This was your father's home, but now it's mine. And I don't host weddings for people who treat others like dirt." There was chaos. Her groom shouted. Her parents threatened lawyers. But it didn't matter. They could scream all they wanted. The ground they stood on? It was mine now. They didn't leave quietly. Madeline was sobbing, mascara streaking her cheeks like black lightning. Her father was red-faced and trembling, demanding someone call the board, though it was unclear what board he thought could undo a deed transfer. Her mother clutched her pearls like this was some kind of royal scandal, whispering, "This is outrageous. He's just the gardener's boy." But no one could help them. The guests, once smug and entertained, were now stunned into silence. A few looked ashamed, a few quietly clapped, and a few smiled. Because deep down, everyone loves to see the powerful fall when they built their kingdom on cruelty. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice again. I simply turned to Mrs. Calder and nodded. "Escort them out," I said, with dignity, even if they didn't offer me the same. Security didn't manhandle them. They didn't need to. The Beaumonts were too shocked to resist. One by one, they were ushered off the estate grounds. Wedding canceled, guests dispersing like leaves in a storm. The groom tried to shout something back at me as he was being led away, but I didn't hear it. I was already walking through the garden. I paused by my father's favorite tree, a tall cypress he planted before I was even born. I touched the trunk gently, like it could feel my heart. He'd passed away 5 years earlier. He never got to see this day, but in that moment, I knew he would have smiled. Not because I took revenge, but because I finally took my place. Later that evening, I sat alone on the balcony overlooking the garden. There was no music, no chaos, just quiet, peaceful. That's when I noticed a small group of servers gathering near the back, whispering. One of them, Clara, a server who always smiled at me when I was a kid, hesitated, then walked toward me. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said gently. "You did something most of us only dream of." I nodded. I didn't do it to humiliate them. "I know," she replied, "but it still felt good." We both laughed softly. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just justice, not just power, but peace.
Real peace. And the satisfaction that the boy they once mocked as just the gardener's son now owned the land they used to walk on like royalty. I didn't need their acceptance anymore. I'd already grown my own garden, and in it I bloomed. The week leading up to the wedding felt like one long, quiet storm. I had already signed the deed papers and finalized the purchase of the estate under my business alias. No one knew the historic venue had changed hands, except the old owner, who shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "They'll never see it coming," he chuckled, and he was right. I watched from a distance as they decorated the gardens I once trimmed in silence. I watched my mother pretend not to know me in front of the wedding planners, her voice crisp and rehearsed. "Don't let that boy near the fountain again. He always smells like dirt." That boy she kept referring to, her own son, was about to become the man who owned every tile they walked on. I visited the staff discreetly, all of whom remembered me, not as the gardener's son, but as Theo, the boy who used to sweep leaves and bring them fresh lemonade when management forgot. I gave them raises, gave them better uniforms, and asked one thing: say nothing until the moment I walked in. The day before the wedding, I stood alone in the very ballroom where I'd once mopped the floors barefoot because they couldn't afford to scuff the marble. The irony made me smile. My fingers ran across the polished wood of the head table. I remembered how the bride once told me, years ago, "You don't belong at tables like this. People like you clear them." That same bride was my cousin Veronica. She didn't know I was the reason her last 3 job interviews went silent. I owned the media group she applied to. Petty? Maybe. But poetic? Absolutely. I didn't return to my rented apartment that night. I stayed at the estate, in the master suite reserved for very important guests. A label I was finally ready to reclaim. As I stood at the mirror fixing my suit for the ceremony, I didn't see the gardener's kid. I saw a man who had every reason to burn it all down, but chose instead to buy the fire, bottle it, and light it on his terms. The wedding day arrived with all the pomp and snobbery one would expect from a family who'd always worshipped appearances more than people. I watched from the private lounge upstairs. Yes, the one labeled owners only. As the guests poured in, old money dripped from every corner of the room.
Tailored tuxedos, polished pearls, women who air kiss like it hurt to smile, and men who bragged about hedge funds louder than the music playing. From the window, I spotted my mother floating around in a champagne dress she clearly borrowed. She clung to Veronica's arm like royalty, smiling for cameras as if this were her crowning achievement. I watched as my uncle pointed at a server and laughed. "Remember when Theo used to scrub those stairs? Poor boy didn't even have proper shoes?" They all laughed, like I didn't exist, like I hadn't rebuilt myself from the dirt they threw on me. Every chuckle was a blade, but I didn't bleed anymore. I documented. I kept score in silence. The server he laughed at? He now worked directly under my operations director. That director? My college roommate, whom they rejected for being too common. Then came the moment. I stepped into the ballroom not as Theo, the boy who was ignored at family reunions, but Theo Foster, the majority owner of the venue they were standing in. I wore a suit that cost more than my mother's monthly rent. Heads turned, but not out of recognition, out of confusion. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know they'd already lost. "Excuse me, sir," a snippy planner tried to intercept me. "Only family past this point." I smiled. "Trust me, I'm family in more ways than you know. But today, I'm also the landlord." She blinked. "What?" I didn't explain. I simply walked over to the venue manager, nodded, and whispered, "It's time." The manager clinked a spoon against a wine glass and took the microphone. "Good afternoon, honored guests. Before we begin the ceremony, there's a special announcement from the new owner of this estate." My mother turned slowly, her face frozen mid-laugh, and I stepped forward. I stood beneath the chandeliers, facing the very people who once treated me like the gum stuck beneath their designer shoes. The laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, the pretentious chatter. It all stopped the second I walked up the stage. Silence bloomed, thick and heavy, and all eyes locked on me. But this time, not as a servant, as the owner. My fingers brushed the microphone, and I let a few more seconds of silence stretch. Let them stew in it. Let them feel the weight of what was coming. "Good evening," I said slowly, letting my voice echo off the marble pillars. "Some of you may not recognize me outside a uniform. Some of you may only remember me from behind the flower beds or with a towel draped over my arm while serving drinks." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, but no one dared interrupt. My Uncle Gordon looked down. My mother's lips twitched, as if she already knew the storm was about to break. And Veronica, oh, Veronica, clutched her bouquet tighter, her white knuckles trembling. "You used to call me the gardener's kid," I continued, my voice sharpening, like it was an insult, like it meant I didn't belong. I took a few slow steps toward the edge of the platform, closer to their perfectly dressed, judgmental faces. "But here's the thing, I never forgot. Not the way you made me eat in the kitchen while the other kids played. Not the way you excluded me from family photos. Not the time at Veronica's 16th birthday when I was asked to clean up cake before I even had a slice." Veronica blinked, stunned. One of the bridesmaids whispered, "Oh my God." I gave a tight smile. "You all saw me as less. But while you were busy laughing, I was learning. While you were sipping wine, I was building. And while you were gatekeeping your so-called high society, I was climbing past it." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and held it up. "This," I said, "is the deed to this venue. Purchased 6 months ago. The ink has dried, the money has cleared, and guess whose name is on it?" A pause. Then I said, "Not yours." The venue manager, standing respectfully at the edge of the stage, stepped forward and handed me the microphone's remote. With one click, the massive projection screens lit up around the room. The first image was of me, 8 years old, dirt-streaked, dragging a rusty wheelbarrow behind me. Then another. Me on my knees, planting marigolds in this very courtyard. One by one, the images changed. My high school graduation, my first small landscaping business, my investor pitch in a boardroom, the contract signing for the venue. With every new slide, gasps filled the air like popcorn in a fire. "This is what you never saw," I said, louder now, "because you never looked." Tears pricked the corners of my mother's eyes. My uncle looked like he'd been hit in the gut. Veronica tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lips moved. Maybe a sorry, maybe a why. But it didn't matter. I wasn't done. "I bought this place for 2 reasons," I said, voice hardening. 1, because I could. 2, because I wanted this day to come. Another beat. "You invited me here to work, to serve. You handed me a black apron and told me to keep the drinks flowing." I dropped the folded apron I had brought with me onto the ground. "But instead, I'll be handing you the bill." They flinched. Good, let them flinch. And then I gave them a smile so calm it rattled them even more. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here to reclaim what you buried, and to remind every single person who's ever been called just the gardener's kid. You can plant roots in dirt and still grow into a tree that towers over all of them." I walked off the stage slowly, as if I had all the time in the world, because I did. And trust me, the best part hadn't even started yet. After I stepped down from the stage, the room stood in stunned silence. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time had frozen, and I was finally in control of the clock. But I wasn't done. As I walked past the stunned faces, I could feel the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I stopped near the table where my mother sat, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her lips parted, eyes glossy with confusion, and something that almost looked like regret. "Almost," she whispered. "Theo, you didn't tell us?" I cut her off with a calm smile. "You never asked." Just then, the venue manager approached her with a printed bill for the night's extravagant reception. Floral arrangements, champagne towers, crystal rentals, valet service, everything. The number at the bottom, $42,000. "But I thought this was complimentary," my uncle stammered. I turned to him slowly. "You thought the help would just give you a wedding gift?" "No, Uncle John. You wanted me invisible, not generous." His face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I looked over at Veronica, now seated stiffly in her wedding gown, shoulders tense as if bracing for the next blow. She had always played the perfect precious doll of the family, Daddy's favorite, the one who once told me, "Theo, even if you wore a tux, people would still see dirt under your nails." Well, now I wore a custom 3-piece suit tailored in Milan, and she was shrinking into her seat like a child who had just seen her kingdom crumble. "You'll still be allowed to finish your ceremony," I said calmly. "But the reception? It's being moved to the courtyard under the tent with no electricity because I rented this hall to another event 2 hours from now." She gasped. "You're kicking me out of my own wedding?" "No, Veronica, I'm not kicking you out. You simply don't own the right to be here anymore. You booked it under the assumption it was public property. It's not." The audience was shifting now. Some guests uncomfortable, others quietly enjoying the takedown. A few even began clapping. That's when one of the groomsmen approached me. He smiled. "You're Theo, right? From high school? Man, I remember you used to mow our field after football games. This is wild." I nodded. Still mowing fields, just different kinds now. Then I leaned in closer. "And you're standing on one of them." He stepped back, laughing awkwardly. I turned and walked through the main aisle, where once I was never even offered a seat. This time people made way, like I was royalty. Funny how quickly the invisible become unforgettable. I stopped at the very back, where the event planner stood, flustered. "Proceed with the second event," I said. "We're hosting a charity dinner for underprivileged kids in the city. Every dollar Veronica's family just paid, it's going to them." The planner's face lit up. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "They took away my childhood. I'd rather give someone else theirs." And just like that, while my family choked on their egos, a new group of children began entering through the back entrance. Kids in donated dresses, kids with wheelchairs, kids with shy eyes and bright hopes. They would now dine where I was once denied entry. The lights dimmed, the music shifted, and history, my history, was rewritten before their eyes. The music changed. No longer the soft, pretentious classical melodies picked from Veronica's wedding playlist. Now it was warm, soulful jazz drifting across the room as the charity dinner began. And those children, those beautiful, wide-eyed kids in secondhand suits and borrowed dresses, looked around in awe as if they had stepped into a fairy tale. Meanwhile, the wedding guests were slowly being ushered outside. The coordinator politely but firmly directed them to the makeshift setup near the tent. Veronica's voice echoed across the marble floor. "You're ruining my wedding!" I turned, keeping my voice even. "Number U ruined everything long ago. This is justice dressed as hospitality." She marched up to me, her heels clacking like thunder against the floor. "You've always been jealous. Just admit it. You hate that I've always been the center of attention." "No," I said gently. "I hated that you were praised for being pretty while I was punished for having potential." She froze. I could see her new husband lingering a few feet behind her, watching silently, eyes scanning the faces around the room. He looked disappointed, perhaps because he now realized he had married into something toxic, maybe something he'd been blind to until today. As Veronica turned away in a huff, one of the kids at the charity dinner tugged at my sleeve. "Mister, are you the king of this place?" I chuckled, kneeling beside him. "Not a king, just someone who finally owns the room where they were once told to wait outside." The boy smiled wide, revealing a missing tooth. "It's really pretty here. I've never been anywhere like this." I swallowed hard. Neither had I, until I bought it. Behind us, my mother was still seated at her table, alone now. She hadn't followed the others outside. Her eyes followed me, not in judgment this time, but in something heavier. Maybe guilt, maybe grief, or maybe the dawning realization that she'd never really known her son. She stood slowly and walked toward me. Her steps were hesitant. Her voice was quiet. "You really did all this?" I nodded. I didn't know you were in pain all those years." I didn't look away. "You didn't care to find out." She winced. I wanted to believe that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, but maybe silence was the cruelest choice of all. For me, it was. There was a moment of tension between us, years packed into seconds. And yet I didn't hate her. Not anymore. I had outgrown hate. I had replaced it with something far more satisfying. Growth, success, and the power to rewrite my story. She glanced at the children dining. "They look happy." "They are." She nodded slowly before whispering, "You were always more than just the gardener's kid." I gave a bittersweet smile. "Too bad it took a deed and a microphone for you to admit it." I turned away and walked toward the courtyard, where one of the little girls had just stood up to give a toast, her plastic cup raised high, to Mr. Theo, who made this day magical. Cheers erupted from the children and volunteers. Laughter, real and pure, rang out through the air. And as I stood there watching joy where there used to be judgment, I realized something. This wasn't just revenge. It was a resurrection. As the last rays of the sunset slipped beneath the city skyline, the once hostile venue now glowed with warmth. The air had shifted from cold tension to gentle peace. I stood under the soft lights, holding a tray of cupcakes one of the volunteers had brought. I wasn't above serving. After all, I had once been the boy cleaning up everyone else's plates. The irony? Now they were calling me Sir. Behind me, the tent that housed the relocated wedding was already showing cracks. The guests, now seated on mismatched chairs with barely functioning fans, looked visibly uncomfortable. Mosquitoes hovered. Someone had tripped over a loose cord. The cake was melting, and the speaker system gave out a high-pitched squeal before dying completely. It wasn't sabotage. It was simply reality catching up to people who had spent their lives coasting on borrowed luxury. That's when I received a text. It was from the venue coordinator. "Would you like me to turn off the generator for the tent? It's connected to your private suite." I stared at it, then slowly typed back, "No. Let them sit in the dark and think." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. From the edge of the tent, I noticed Veronica's new husband standing alone, away from the crowd. He looked defeated. He hadn't even noticed her slipping off her heels and storming out moments ago, furious at everything from the lack of air conditioning to the fact that her bouquet had started wilting. He walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. "You own all this?" he asked, voice low. "I do. You didn't say anything earlier." "I didn't need to," I replied. "But your bride did." He sighed. "She's been difficult. I thought she'd outgrow it." I offered a half smile. "Some people don't outgrow anything, they just grow louder." He nodded slowly. "Do you regret doing all this?" I shook my head. "I regret waiting this long." A moment passed before he asked something I didn't expect. "Do you think she ever loved you? As a brother?" That stopped me. I looked over at the tent again, at the golden girl who had spent her life mocking the roots I came from, then watched me bloom anyway. "No," I said honestly. "She didn't love me. She loved being above me." He lowered his head. "I wish I'd met you under different circumstances," he said. I nodded. "Maybe you still will." Just then, a young girl at the charity table tugged on my hand. "Can we dance again?" I laughed softly. "Only if you lead." I joined the circle of children, clapping along as music played from the donated speakers, their hands sticky from cake and juice, their eyes lit up with wonder. This was the family I had built with compassion, not blood, with kindness, not obligation. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. But the night wasn't quite over yet. As I led the kids in a silly dance, a figure appeared at the edge of the courtyard. It was my father. His expression unreadable, suit jacket off, tie loosened. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching me glow in the very space he had once told me I'd never belong. He stood there for a long moment. My father, the man who once called me just a helper, who taught me to sweep without speaking, to shrink instead of shine, who never defended me when others mocked my hand-me-downs or my dirt-stained jeans. I looked him in the eye. The jazz behind me faded into background murmurs. Even the kids quieted as if sensing something unspoken shift in the air. Finally, he stepped forward. Each step seemed hesitant, as if the ground beneath him remembered how many times it had watched him look down on me. "You bought this place?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded once. "For how long?" he added, as if time might lessen its weight. 6 months, I said. "I've been preparing for this night for 6 years." He glanced at the glowing garden, the happy faces, the wedding tent slowly emptying behind him like a sinking ship. "This is poetic," he said quietly. I tilted my head. No, Dad, this is justice. Poetic is optional. He winced. You always made me feel like the roots I came from were something to be ashamed of, I said. But I finally understand. Roots don't make you less. They make you strong. They keep you grounded when the wind tries to rip you apart. He looked at the kids behind me, dancing again now, laughing, existing without judgment. I guess you became more than I ever imagined. You imagined a gardener's kid, I replied. I became the gardener, the architect, the owner, and the man your pride never let you raise. He blinked away something. Maybe shame, maybe tears. But he said nothing more, just nodded once and slowly walked back the way he came. I didn't stop him, because closure doesn't always need an apology. Sometimes you don't need their regret. You just need to no longer need them. As the final hour ticked on, the charity dinner ended. The children, sleepy and full, were gently packed into vans. The staff, volunteers, and neighbors all offered hugs and thanks. One elderly woman pressed a note into my hand. It read, "You didn't just change their night. You changed their belief in kindness." And with that, I stood alone in the empty venue. The chandeliers dimmed. The music faded. But my soul? It roared, because they had called me the gardener's kid. But I planted my own seeds, and tonight I watched them bloom.